You know that little voice in your head that sometimes says, "Go on, it's just this one time. It won't hurt anyone"? Well, today we're going to dive into the world of Immanuel Kant. He came up with this really powerful way of looking at right and wrong that, honestly, flips the script. It's got nothing to do with the outcome and everything to do with fairness and respect.
All right, so to really wrap our heads around what Kant's getting at, let's start with a scenario that probably feels, well, pretty familiar to all of us. It really boils down to that temptation we all feel sometimes to make ourselves a special exception to the rules.
So picture this person. They're thinking, you know what, if I just keep a little bit of this tax money for a family vacation, it'll create so much happiness. And the government, they're huge. They won't even notice it's missing. And you see the same kind of logic everywhere, right? The person who zooms down the emergency lane to beat a traffic jam, or the student who cheats on just one exam to pass a tough class.
And that brings us to the central question here. If they get what they want, and it seems like nobody really gets hurt, then what exactly is the problem? I mean, where's the harm? The way Kant answers this is what makes his whole philosophy so different.
See, for Kant, the problem isn't about the consequences at all. It's about the sheer unfairness of it. He'd say that the tax cheat, the person cutting in line, the exam cheater, they're all counting on one thing, that everyone else is going to follow the rules. Their success, their little shortcut, only works because they're breaking a system they expect everyone else to maintain. And that, right there, is a massive contradiction. It's just fundamentally unfair.
Okay, so how are we supposed to spot this kind of unfairness in our own lives, in our own decisions? Well, this is where Kant gets really clever. He came up with this brilliant, almost mathematical test to figure it out.
So first, we've got to get this term he uses, a maxim. It sounds complicated, but it's not. It's just the rule or the principle you're following when you decide to do something. So for our tax cheat, the maxim is basically, when I want some extra cash for myself, I'll just not pay my taxes. Simple. We all have these personal rules we act on, even if we never actually say them out loud.
All right, here's the test itself. Kant called it the principle of universalizability. Quite a mouthful, I know. But it's basically 3 steps. Step 1, figure out your maxim, state it clearly. Step 2, imagine a world where everybody follows that maxim, like it's a universal law. And then, step 3, ask yourself the million-dollar question. In that new world, could you still actually achieve your original goal?
And here's the kicker. If the answer is no, if your goal totally falls apart in that world, then your maxim has failed the test. It's built on a contradiction. And for Kant, if something's irrational, it's immoral. Simple as that. But hey, if the answer's yes, if it all still works out, then your action is morally okay.
Let's go back to the tax cheat. This just illustrates it perfectly. If everyone's maximum was, "I'll cheat on my taxes to go on vacation," what would happen? Well, the government would collapse. There'd be no money for roads, for schools, for anything. The whole system that the cheat is trying to exploit would completely disappear. Their goal to get away with it becomes impossible. It literally self-destructs when everyone does it.
Okay, that seems like a pretty solid logical test for fairness, right? But let's push it a little. Let's see if it holds up when we throw a real curveball at it. And this is where it gets tricky. The test works like a charm for things like lying or cheating, because those actions depend on a world where most people are telling the truth and playing fair. But it starts to break down when you look at more extreme, more disturbing examples.
Just think about a true fanatic. Someone whose personal rule, their maxim, is to persecute a specific group of people they hate. And this person is so committed, so fanatical, that they would honestly be willing to be persecuted themselves if the tables were turned. Now, let's run that through the test. Can you imagine a world where everyone follows that maxim? Yes, you can. It would be a truly horrific world, but the fanatic's goal, to persecute people, could absolutely be achieved. Their awful maxim passes the test.
And that is a massive problem. If your moral test can't rule out the actions of a consistent, dedicated fanatic, then that test can't be the whole story. There's got to be something essential missing from the equation.
So this flaw, this big hole in the first test, brings us to Kant's second big idea. And this one is arguably even more influential. In fact, you could say this next idea became a cornerstone for our entire modern concept of human rights. This is what he called the principle of humanity. And honestly, it's a total game changer. What it says is that the foundation of morality isn't about logical consistency, it's about dignity. It's the idea that every rational person has this inherent priceless value. You can't just use people like they're tools to get what you want.
You have to respect them as ends in themselves, as individuals with their own goals, their own dreams, their own lives.
Okay, now let's break this down because it's a really important distinction. Kant separates treating someone as a means from treating them as a mere means. So think about it. When you hire a plumber to fix a leaky pipe, are you using them? Well, yeah, you're using them as a means to get your pipe fixed. But, and this is the crucial part, that's totally okay because you're also treating them as an end. You're respecting their autonomy. They agree to the job, you agree on a price, you pay them for their time and skill. It's a consensual exchange. But if you were to lie to them or force them to fix your pipe for free, now you're treating them as a mere means, just a tool. And that's when you've crossed a serious moral line.
And this is why this second principle is so powerful. It succeeds exactly where the first one failed. The fanatic, they're wrong because they treat their victims as mere things, as obstacles in the way of their goal, completely stripping them of their humanity. Slavery is profoundly immoral because it denies a person's autonomy and treats them as property. Even something like paternalism, treating adults like children for their own good, is wrong because it disrespects their capacity to choose for themselves. You can literally see how this one idea, respect for persons, forms the bedrock of our modern ideas about human rights.
All right, so let's zoom out and pull all this together. What is Kant's huge enduring contribution to the way we think about ethics?
Well, before Kant came along, a lot of ethical thinking was all about the consequences. It was consequentialist. You judge an action by its results. Did it create more happiness or more pain? Kant just completely turned that on its head. He said, nope, forget the results. The morality of an action is found in the intention, in the rule, the maxim that you were following. It's not about what happens in the end. It's about why you did it in the first place.
So from a Kantian point of view, the goal of life isn't to just make the world a happier place. It's about something deeper. It's about acting with integrity. It's about doing your duty, being fair, and above all, respecting that priceless, profound value that exists inside every single rational person.
Now, of course, no theory is perfect, and Kant's has its own tough questions. I mean, applying the principle of humanity can get pretty vague in complicated real-world situations. And here's a big one. If our moral value comes from our ability to reason and be autonomous, what does that mean for beings who don't have those abilities? What about infants, or animals, or people with severe cognitive disabilities?
And that's the really tough question that Kant's philosophy leaves us wrestling with. If our ultimate value really comes from our ability to reason, what moral duties do we truly owe to those who can't? It forces us to think hard about who belongs inside our moral community and why. And that is a huge challenge that's still right at the heart of so many ethical debates today.
Okay, imagine this scenario. You're a doctor, right? You find out one of your patients has this illness. It's minor, not life-threatening. But, and here's the kicker, if you reveal this diagnosis publicly, mass panic, riots, the local economy tanks, maybe thousands of lives lost in the chaos. So if you lie to the patient, just keep it quiet, you actually maximize overall happiness, you prevent a total catastrophe, save lives, the results are, well, overwhelmingly good. And yet, lying to that patient, someone who trusts you, it just feels fundamentally wrong, doesn't it? Like you're breaking some kind of core duty.
Exactly. And that tension, that feeling where the best outcome clashes head-on with what feels like a basic moral rule, that's precisely the philosophical territory of Immanuel Kant, arguably the greatest thinker of the Enlightenment. He stands as this huge, unavoidable counterpoint to utilitarianism. Kant basically said, forget consequences, forget maximizing happiness. Morality isn't about results. For him, the only thing that truly matters is your intention, your duty. The whole point of morality isn't really about making things better in terms of well-being. It's about acting justly. It's about rules that everyone, rationally, should follow.
Okay, wow. That's a big shift in thinking. So our mission for this deep dive then is to really get into Kantian ethics. We need to unpack this focus on intentions, rational consistency, and especially his two really famous moral principles, universalizability and humanity.
And you, listening, need to kind of brace yourself for a mental adjustment here. We are taking the results of Maximus completely off the table as a way to judge morality. We're diving into the rulebook that Kant believed every single rational being has to follow. No exceptions.
So Kant looked around and saw something pretty common, right? This intuition people have. We really, really dislike inconsistency. We hate it when people make exceptions for themselves. Think about the tax cheat, the corrupt politician, or, yeah, even the person cutting into the emergency lane in traffic. Their success, their benefit, only work because everyone else is following the rules they're breaking.
Exactly. And this gut feeling against unfairness shows up in these sort of simple moral tests we use all the time, like asking, well, what if everyone did that? If the answer is chaos or disaster, we tend to think, okay, the action's wrong. Or we pull out the golden rule. How would you like it if I did that to you? Which is all about consistency based on how you want to be treated.
Okay, but here's where Kant gets really rigorous. He actually found both of those tests, these common sense things, to be, well, not good enough, flawed even. How could the golden rule be flawed? It seems so basic.
Because both tests ultimately rely on either outcomes or just, subjective feelings and desires. Kant wanted morality grounded purely in objective reason. Take the what if everyone did that test. Okay, imagine everyone decided to be celibate. Humanity dies out, right? Disaster. But does that disastrous result mean the act of choosing celibacy is somehow immoral for individual? Kant would say no. The test fails because it's still focused on consequences. And the golden rule, it fails because it hinges entirely on what the person wants. Think about someone with really twisted desires, like a masochist who wants to be harmed. Or worse, a fanatic like a Nazi who is so committed to their awful principles they genuinely say, yeah, fine, do it to me too if the roles were reversed. Suddenly, the golden rule seems to permit horrible things because it depends on personal preference, not objective right or wrong.
Ah, okay. So he needed a consistency test that wasn't about feelings or what happens afterwards or what I personally want. It had to be about pure reason itself.
Exactly. Which leads us straight to the absolute core of his ethics, the principle of universalizability. Put simply, an act is morally okay if, and only if, its maxim can be universalized.
Okay, hold on. Maxim. That's key Kantian jargon. We need to define that clearly. What's a maxim?
A maxim is basically the rule you're following when you act. It's not just what you do, but crucially, it includes your intention and your reason for doing it. It spells out your principle. So if you cheat on your taxes, your maxim isn't just cheat on taxes. It might be something like, whenever I can get away with it and gain financially, I will deceive the tax authorities because I want a cheap vacation and I'm counting on others being honest to keep the system running so I can benefit. That's the rule you've given yourself.
Gotcha. So the maxim includes the why, and the morality depends on whether that rule itself is rational.
How do we test if it's universalizable then? You said Kant had a process.
Yep, a clear three-step test.
Okay.
First, state your maxim clearly. What are you planning to do and why?
Second, imagine a world where everyone accepts and acts on that very same maxim. Like, it's a universal law of nature.
Right. Everyone does it for the same reason.
Third, and this is the crucial step, ask. In that world where everyone follows my rule, can the original goal of my action still be achieved?
So can the purpose behind my maxim still work if everyone adopted it?
Precisely. If the answer is no, then the maxim basically self-destructs when universalized. It's contradictory, irrational, and therefore the action is immoral. Let's go back to the tax cheat. Maxim. I'll cheat to get a benefit, relying on others paying. In the world where everyone cheats, the tax system collapses. There is no benefit to be gained anymore because the system that provided it is gone. The cheat's original goal, getting that cheap vacation funded by a working tax system, becomes impossible. The maxim is self-defeating. It's irrational.
Okay, that makes sense. The action is wrong, not because the tax system collapses, that's a consequence, but because the rule the person is trying to follow is fundamentally irrational when applied universally. It contradicts itself. And this ties into his ideas about imperatives, right? Hypothetical versus categorical.
Exactly. Most rules we follow are what Kant called hypothetical imperatives. They're commands of reason based on our desires. Like, if you want to pass the exam, then you must study. The command study only applies if you have the desire to pass.
Okay, makes sense.
But moral duties, for Kant, are different. They are categorical imperatives. They command absolutely universally, regardless of your personal desires or goals. They apply to every rational being simply because they are rational. So when the tax cheat's maxim fails the universalization test, it shows the action is irrational. Why? Because they're trying to make an exception for themselves, violating the very consistency that reason demands. Immorality, for Kant, is fundamentally irrational.
That principle of universalizability is incredibly powerful, very logical. But it does seem to lead to this really tough spot. Moral absolutism, the idea that some moral rules have zero exceptions, ever. And this comes up starkly in that famous inquiring murderer case.
Ah, yes, the inquiring murderer at the door. Classic Kantian dilemma. So the setup is, a known murderer comes to your door asking where their intended victim is. And the victim is actually hiding in your house. Kant was adamant, lying is wrong, even here. Now, why? He had to show that the maxim for lying fails the universalizability test in all circumstances. what's the maximum for lying? Something like, I will tell a falsehood whenever doing so is convenient for me to achieve some goal. Now, universalize that. Imagine a world where everyone lies whenever it suits them. What happens to communication?
It breaks down completely. You couldn't trust anything anyone says.
Exactly. Trust evaporates. And if no one trusts anyone, then the lie itself cannot achieve its goal. Why? Because no one would believe your lie in the first place. The very possibility of successful deception relies on a general background expectation that people are telling the truth. So the maxim of lying, when universalized, destroys the conditions that make lying possible. It self-destructs.
Wow. Okay, I see the logic now. It's not just about the bad consequence of the murder, it's about the internal contradiction of the maxim itself. Still, that conclusion, letting the murderer find the victim because you can't tell a lie, feels incredibly harsh, almost inhuman, which is probably why many people find Kant's second major principle more appealing, or at least a necessary complement.
That's right. When the universalizability test leads to conclusions that seem, let's say, counterintuitive or overly harsh, ethicists often turn to Kant's other formulation, the principle of humanity. And the rule here is, always treat a human being, yourself included, as an end in themselves and never merely as a means.
And the definition of human being here is key, isn't it? He means any being that is rational and autonomous.
Yes. Rationality, the ability to reason, and autonomy, the ability to be self-governing, to set your own goals and rules based on reason, those are the magic ingredients for Kant.
So what's the difference between using someone as a means versus merely as a means? That sounds like a fine line.
It's crucial. Using someone as a means happens all the time and is often fine. When you hire a plumber, you're using their skills as a means to get your pipes fixed. But crucially, if you do it respectfully, with their informed consent, paying them fairly, you're still respecting them as an end in themselves. You're acknowledging their rationality, their autonomy, their own goals. Treating someone merely as a means is totally different. It's using them like a tool, an object, with no regard for their own rational will or dignity. Think about, kidnapping the plumber and forcing them to fix your pipes without pay. You're denying their autonomy, their goals, their value as a person. You're treating them just like a wrench.
Okay, that clarifies it. And the power of this principle is that it grounds human dignity directly in our rationality and autonomy. Our ability to reason and choose freely is what gives us inherent worth and thus moral rights. And this principle of humanity makes it really clear why things like slavery or rape are profoundly immoral, right?
Absolutely. In those horrific cases, the perpetrator is treating the victim purely as an object for their own gratification or benefit, completely ignoring or actively destroying the victim's autonomy and rationality. It's the ultimate violation of treating someone merely as a means.
It also helps explain why something maybe less extreme, like paternalism, can be morally problematic.
Yes, exactly. Paternalism is when you interfere with an autonomous adult's choices for their own good, basically treating them like a child because you think you know better. Kant would say that's wrong because you're disrespecting their rational capacity to govern themselves. You're overriding their autonomy, treating them as incapable of making their own choices, even if your intentions are good.
Okay, so Kant gives us these two powerful lenses: universalizability, rational consistency, and humanity, respect for rational autonomy. But we have to address the challenges, the hard questions these principles raise.
Definitely, no system is perfect, and Kant faces some really significant hurdles.
Let's go back to the universalizability test for a second. We talked about consistency, but what about the fanatic, the Nazi example you raised earlier? If a Nazi applies their hateful rules consistently, maybe they genuinely would accept being persecuted. If they were in the minority group, their maxim might seem universalizable, right? They aren't making an exception for themselves in terms of the form of the rule. Does Kant's first principle fail to condemn consistent, systematic evil if the evil doesn't involve a logical contradiction when universalized?
That is arguably the single biggest theoretical challenge for the principle of universalizability. Can it handle the consistent fanatic? Many argue that it struggles here. If the fanatic's maxim is just, I will apply rule X universally to group Y, and it doesn't inherently self-destruct in the way lying or cheating does, the first principle might seem to permit it. And this is precisely why the principle of humanity is often seen as the indispensable backstop.
Ah, so the second principle catches what the first might miss.
In many ways, yes. Even if a fanatic's rule could be consistently universalized without logical contradiction, which is debatable itself, it would almost certainly fail the principle of humanity test. Treating an entire group of people merely as means to achieve some political or ideological end, denying their inherent dignity and autonomy, that's a clear violation of the second principle. So humanity condemns the fanatic, even if universalizability struggles.
Okay, that helps. But the principle of humanity has its own major problem, doesn't it? The scope issue.
Yes, that's the other really tough one. Remember, for Kant, moral worth, dignity, and rights are all grounded in rationality and autonomy.
So, what about beings who lack full rationality or autonomy? Infants, people with severe cognitive disabilities, non-human animals.
Exactly. If rationality and autonomy are the entry tickets to the moral community, Kant's theory seems to imply that these individuals or beings fall outside of it. They lack intrinsic moral importance in his framework.
Which leads to the deeply uncomfortable implication that maybe it's morally permissible to treat them merely as means.
That's the implication, and it's a huge point of contention and criticism of Kantian ethics, especially today. Think about debates on animal rights, environmental ethics, the status of AI. Kant's strict criteria create real problems for including the non-rational or non-autonomous.
Wow. Okay, so it's a powerful system, but definitely not without its serious challenges and, well, blind spots maybe. But stepping back, what Kant really forces us to do is shift our focus, isn't it? Away from just looking at outcomes or what makes me happy or what's convenient. He makes us look at the rule behind our action, the maxim, and ask, is this a principle I could rationally will everyone to follow? Am I respecting the inherent dignity of other rational beings?
That's the heart of it. He champions rational consistency and respect for dignity above everything else. It's about duty, doing the right thing because it's the right thing, because it's rational, and respects humanity not because of what you get out of it.
Even if following that duty leads to, well, difficult outcomes sometimes, like with the inquiring murderer.
Be duty for duty's sake. That's the Kantian mandate. Act rationally, act out of respect, even if it doesn't feel good or lead to the best consequences in a utilitarian sense.
So wrapping up this deep dive, we've wrestled with Kant's pretty demanding ethical world, governed by these universalizable maxims and this absolute respect for rational autonomy.
Yeah, it's heavy stuff, but incredibly influential. So, for a final thought to chew on, let's think about something common. Puffery in advertising.
Puffery? You mean those ads with really exaggerated claims like Axe body spray making you irresistible or a drink giving you wings? Claims nobody really takes literally.
Exactly. They're generally seen as ethically okay because, the assumption is no reasonable person is actually deceived. It's just hype.
Okay.
But let's run the Kantian tests. First, universalizability. What's the maxim? Maybe. I will make exaggerated, non-literal claims about my product to generate sales, relying on the fact that most advertising is somewhat truthful or factual. Could the goal of advertising actually persuading people to buy things be achieved if every single ad was pure, unbelievable puffery? Would anyone pay attention or trust any marketing claims at all? Does the maxim self-destruct?
Interesting question. If all ads were like that, maybe the whole system would collapse because nobody would believe anything.
Maybe. Now, try the principle of humanity. Does puffery treat the consumer merely as a means? Even if no one is literally fooled, is it manipulating them by appealing to perhaps unrealistic desires or insecurities? Is it treating their capacity for desire as just a button to push for profit, thereby undermining their rational autonomy in some subtle way?
So is it disrespecting their rationality by using emotional hype instead of facts, even if they know it's hype?
That's the question Kant pushes us towards. Does it treat the consumer as an end in themselves, a rational agent making informed choices, or just a target for manipulation? It's a really good test case for applying these principles to the gray areas we encounter every day.
Definitely something to think about. And it makes you wonder how often we're already using these Kantian ideas, maybe without even realizing it when we judge fairness or respect in our own lives.